All right, we've got Amanda from Not a Ballerina with us today, and we're going to be talking all things travel. She's really into thoughtful travel, so we're going to kind of pick her brains about that. And I also see on your website that you do a lot of travel with your child.
I sure
so
do.
We'll be talking about that too. Welcome to Streets and Eats, the travel and food podcast dedicated to taking our listeners to the sights, sounds, and flavors of fascinating places near and far, both on and off the beaten path. We're Jim and Corinne Vale, and we've been traveling internationally and domestically together for decades, visiting more than 90 countries in all 50 states in the USA. We'll share all of the local knowledge and food expertise we've gathered through years of living as expats in Asia and Europe, as well as traveling with families spanning multiple generations around the world. Join us each week for a new adventure. Yeah, what exactly is the thoughtful travel idea, and where did it come from?
Well, it sort of is something that I've been thinking about really all my life by accident. And then about, 7 or 8 years ago, I'd been blogging for a long time, since 2005. And I'd lived abroad in a few different places and come back to Perth, and I didn't have as much. I wasn't going to be writing destination kind of content anymore. And what I'd often talk to people about and started to write about a bit was how much travel had changed me. So it started off being quite a self-centered version of thoughtful travel. I'd lived abroad. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'd lived abroad, and it had completely changed, like almost my whole personality, and certainly like the trajectory of my life. And so I kind of started off, that was the thoughtful travel initially. And then when I wanted to start my own podcast, I also had the same, I live in Perth. It's the most isolated city in the world. We can't travel frequently, especially these days. Except to Bali, yes, exactly, which is not really my favourite place because it's full of people from Perth. So
I neither. Not because of the Perth people, but just because it's just not my style.
I think because of the Perth people, it's become not your style, I reckon. So I think, I think this, it's a sad case there, I think. But I kind of thought, okay, I really want to tap into more of this, how travel changes people kind of aspect. And, through my blogging, I had, and living abroad and stuff, I had a network of people all across the world who were willing to talk to me on my podcast. And so I thought, okay, well, it'll be Thoughtful Travel. So it became the Thoughtful Travel podcast. And so I kind of started it without having a massive kind of philosophy other than I think travel is life-changing. And then through talking to people and reading more over the years and, kind of diving a lot deeper into it, I've come to really think more deeply about why we need to travel more thoughtfully. And that brings in the non-selfish, the non-self-centered aspects as well. So, traveling sustainably or traveling in a way that helps the community where we're visiting or, all of these kind of, ethical issues as well. And lots of other kinds of tangents to being a thoughtful traveler. So it's a really kind of all-encompassing thing, but basically at the heart of it, I think, is when we don't just kind of take a holiday, we don't just go somewhere to spoil ourselves, but we go somewhere with a bit more thought to it, or sometimes a lot more thought, but at least a bit more thought. What can I personally get out of this experience other than just relax? And what can I learn from it that I can then teach other people? And what can I do that's, helpful or useful or, in some way thoughtful when I travel? So just kind of, stepping back and making it, a bigger part of a bigger experience in a way.
So having a little more intent to your travel than just going to see places and not
just ticking items off a bucket list. Is it just because everyone said we should see the Eiffel Tower, so we're going to go there and tick it off? But being thoughtful about what do I want to see, what's interesting to me, what might I learn something from, what might be what's something that has a different impact, or lots of different ways to think about how you approach a thoughtful trip.
So have you done some volunteerism, or is it more of a, I don't know. You explain.
So I personally haven't done a lot of volunteer work because first of all, I just haven't had super many opportunities. Only travel a few times a year, outside of pandemic times, because I've got a child here in school and so on, and distance from Perth. And also, volunteer tourism is fraught with difficulty and, trying to actually do something that really is effective. I tend to think that mostly an effective volunteer trip is something where you spend a much longer time somewhere where you actually have skills that aren't available in the local community and so on. So, it's sort of something I would like to do more of down the line when I'm, when I'm able to travel for, 6 to 12 months at a time again, that kind of thing. But I think what I've done more of, I've actually forgotten what the first part of your question was.
Well,
Corinne.
that was it. Was that translated into volunteering? Or
good. That's right.
How do you translate that?
Yeah. So instead, what I've done is whenever we travel, and so I travel with my son who's about to be 12, but so we've traveled a lot. I've traveled a lot with him between the age of kind of 5 and 10 or 11. Is we kind of approach it thoughtfully. So I have this kind of structure, I suppose, where we think about being thoughtful before, during, and after a trip. So the before part is not just what people might think of like researching or planning, but also kind of starting to immerse yourself in things that are interesting to you about your destination. So a couple of years back, we went to Denmark in Europe. I always have to distinguish that we have a town called Denmark here. So Denmark in Europe.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So when I would say to people we're going to Denmark, it didn't sound very impressive. It sounds like we're just going a couple of hours away. So it's always very confusing.
That's funny.
Yeah. So we and so before that trip, so Denmark is a very modern destination. It's not something where we've been in the past to like Cambodia and places like that where there's obvious things that you want to learn about before you go. But we went to Denmark. I thought, okay, well, what will we do? And so we immersed ourselves in some Danish TV series, and I read some books about there was a great book called The Year of Living Danishly, where a British expat lived in Denmark. She still does actually because she loves it, and talked about all of these really intriguing aspects of Danish culture. And so we do that kind of deep dive into what we want to do there. And then when we're there, we're trying to be thoughtful in ways like we rented bicycles instead of using a car. So we, rode all around. So the sustainable side of it. And we rented the bicycles from a company that we found that was actually kind of a social enterprise. And they were also, using some of their profits to ship bicycles down to, I think, Mozambique, if I remember correctly. And then they would go travel to Mozambique, and they were training locals there to be bicycle mechanics. And they'd set up all these, people down there who were able to then earn a living out of this and so on. So, just things like that, that you wouldn't normally think about. And then the after the trip thoughtfulness is kind of reflecting on, well, what did we learn about that? Or what do we want to know more about? Or, even kind of adopting habits and ideas that we like in Denmark, there's everywhere is candles. It's the hygge kind of coziness kind of aspect, and so we would like quite deliberately sit down on a Sunday afternoon with a nice afternoon tea and light a bunch of candles and kind of be hygge about it. Which just to kind of it's a nice ritual to do sometimes, and so that's kind of an example of I guess the whole gamut of thoughtful travel from one kind of trip.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I really like the before, middle, and after, like during and after. I think that's key. We're both Jim and I are retired educators, so we're always talking about reflections, and our initial website was in reflection, or still is, reflections en route, because reflecting not just about telling stories or capturing images, but just reflecting on what you've learned and how to improve that, and be cognitive about how this is going to further you and hopefully people around
others.
You.
Yeah.
So it's really important. And I do believe, I love hearing that you're doing it with your son, because I do believe the earlier you start doing that, the better. It's just, that's the educator in me coming out.
Well, I mean, and I'm obviously biased, but I think that a lot of his behaviours and how he's grown up so far have been really heavily influenced by all the travels we've done. So,
I have no doubt. We grew 2 daughters the exact same way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We lived overseas. We've actually been married, 38 years in February next month.
Wow.
And
Is it that many? Wow.
Yeah. And we've only lived in the United States for, now 9 of those.
Wow, that's not much. Wow.
Yeah. So we've lived all our married lives with the kids growing up overseas and really immersing ourselves in different cultures and trying to learn as much as possible. And just the exposure, just the confidence. I mean, all of that is so important. I think that they gain in so many ways that we may not even really recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being aware of so many different kinds of people in the world and different languages and, like certainly my son grew up not even just knowing that all of that exists without having to, at some stage down the track, realize, people speak different languages. He just always knew that from the moment that he could understand that, people spoke, I guess. So, those sorts of things. And just being able to be friends with people of many different cultures and, so many different, eating different foods, all of those kinds of things. And he's a real fiend for kind of general knowledge and like geography facts and historical stuff. And I used to really pride myself on my geography skills. And quite often now he'll like quiz me over, what's the capital of so-and-so? I'm like, oh, I know. And I don't know. And he's right. It's awful. But I'm sort of proud too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great for mom to be wrong sometimes or dad to be wrong. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he still has that, that fresh elastic memory. So, and for us, so many things have come and gone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Well,
but it's true. And we do talk about that a lot with traveling with kids is travel as early as you can with them. For most people, it's the fear of the unknown that keeps them from traveling. And for those kids who are lucky enough to have parents to drag them along, if you will, and get them immersed in it, that unknown no longer really exists because that's what they know now. Is that absolutely there are other people in the world. There's different food everywhere you go. There's different languages, and that's the expected now. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that whole comfort zone stretching makes a big difference. Yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely. And just the fact that it's normal. I mean, I grew up the exact same way. My mother was so into this, and I saw you did a lot of travel as a child as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even though we asked you the definition of thoughtful travel, I know you come to that later. You didn't start out with that because that's just not how it works. So one of our things that we like to find out is your personal evolution. Like, sure, you were traveling with your family, but as you grew to be an adult, how did you become the world traveler?
That's a really good question. So, as you said, I didn't travel a lot as a kid, but we did, when we traveled, it was a lot at once. So when I was 9, my parents took us to Europe for 6 months. So we bought a camper van in the UK and traveled around Europe for 6 months. So it was we didn't know it back then, but it was slow travel. It was definitely budget travel. And, we'd be staying in little caravan parks in suburban, the cheapest parts of town in suburban areas. So, we would get to know all the local playgrounds and go to all the supermarkets. So it was very much that, much more immersive travel compared to, taking a tour where you whistle stop, every night's a different city kind of thing. So I think that was the first part where I thought, okay, this is what traveling is. You move around slowly and, you get to spend lots of time in supermarkets. I have so many childhood memories of my dad miming different things in different countries in Europe, trying to explain. I remember in France, he's trying to get some honey and he's like buzzing bees to try and explain he needs honey and things like that. So I think that was the initial, that's what I thought travel was, because that was my first experience. And then I was also lucky when I was a teenager. I was 14 and I was studying German in high school, and I spent a month in Germany on a school trip. So we were staying with different host families, which is, again, much more immersive than the average trip. So I think that those early experiences kind of paved the way for me to think that that's more what traveling is. And then during my kind of late teens, early 20s, I again didn't have the chance to travel very much, but my mum moved to the US. In fact, she'd married an American, and so we would go back and forth from there. And that was, again, much more immersive travel. And then I moved to Japan. And so from there, I lived in Japan and Slovakia and Germany. And so although it's not traveling in a sense, living abroad is like traveling, full time.
Sure.
And so that was my, my next experience. So I think, it partly was by luck, because, the way that my parents could show us Europe that was the only way they could really afford to do it. And we have this thing in Australia, we have long service leave. So my dad had worked at a bank for, well, by then, I suppose 20 something years or more. And so he was entitled to have 6 months paid off work. So, yeah.
Wow, I like that.
Hooray. Yeah. Long service leave is amazing. So
it doesn't happen in the States.
No. I think it's really only Australia, maybe New Zealand. I don't know. It dates back to kind of colonial times when you needed that long, when, British settlers were here and they needed that long to be able to get back to England by boat and spend some time there and then come back again. Sure. And of course, we have never let that out of our workplace contracts. So
yeah, don't
so
let
it still
that
exists.
go.
It's not as good as it used to be. Yeah, I'm self-employed, so I don't get any long service leave. But lots of Australians still do, and that's one of the reasons Australians often are taking longer trips around the world, because we have that that capacity. So that was, they weren't ever going to take us on lots of overseas trips because it's so far from here, but that meant that we had that kind of slow travel experience as our first one. So yeah, I think
That's
that kind of
awesome.
really paved the way into me becoming a thoughtful traveler.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Well, we're both teachers, and that's what got us, what allowed us to live in so many different countries overseas. I'm just kind of curious, what were you doing that let you move to Japan and all these places?
Jet, right?
Not yet, but I was teaching English. So at the time back here in Australia, I had been working as an academic, and I'd kind of progressed. I just, like the year before I moved, I'd got this kind of dream job, the dream job I thought I would get to in my 40s, but I'd got it in my I was 24, 25. And so I loved the job, but I was kind of thinking, okay, but now what? There seems to be I was kind of working towards this, and now I've got there and it's fine, but I don't want to do this stuff forever. And I had long wanted to leave Perth. So when you grow up somewhere really isolated, everyone wants to leave, and so really I was just like, anything will do. Like I'd nearly got an opportunity to volunteer in the Solomon Islands through a government program. I got accepted, and then we were about to kind of start the process, and then I actually can't remember what happened, but the program shut down or something, so that was off the cards. I tried to move with my boyfriend at the time. We'd moved to South Australia, anywhere that's not Perth. Moved to Adelaide, and he was retrenched a month after we arrived. So there was like a new CEO in the company, and all these people were let go. So we moved back to Perth. And so then I saw one day an ad in the paper, this is that long ago, that's how we found these things, that they were interviewing for English teaching jobs at Nova in Japan. Back then, and I was like, oh, okay, this is good. And the pay seemed reasonable. It was still enough that we could still pay our mortgage back here and save some and travel. And this is 2000, so it was a long time ago. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. And my boyfriend wasn't super keen about teaching. I mean, I was working in the education sector, so that seemed a good fit for me, but he actually quite enjoyed it as well. And we moved on from there and taught business English in Slovakia and in Germany after that. So yeah, I actually came back to Australia and still taught for a couple of years before I moved into self-employment. So yeah, I thought it was such a good way to travel, because you get to, your job is to talk to local people. And as an English teacher, especially a lot of it was conversational English, your job is to talk to them about lots of different topics. I mean, Nothing could be better. And they're much more open, because they're, that's the role you're doing in that hour or whatever. You are meant to be talking about all kinds of things. And so, I often would go home and think I have learnt way more today from my students than they learnt from me. But it was fabulous. I loved it. Yeah.
What a great way to immerse yourself in that culture too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if I was ever like unsure about something, or I saw something on my way home or whatever, I would know, well, tomorrow I'll just ask my students and, I would get sorts of explanations and learn anything I wanted to learn. It was wonderful.
So where did you go in Japan and for how long?
So we lived in Osaka for 2 years. So, Osaka and then Nara, but I was teaching in East Osaka in a really tiny school in Higashi Osaka. And during that 2 years, of course, we did make the most of it and travel like the length and breadth. So, and I've been back a couple of times, had to take my son back to Japan, of course, because I'd been raving to him about it. For the first, 7 or 8 years of his life, he thought takeaway food equaled Japanese food. He didn't know about McDonald's or anything else like that. So we had to go back there. Yeah. So all in the Kansai area was where I was based, which is my favorite.
Really easy because then there's so much going on in that area.
Yeah,
our first time we lived in Japan, we lived in northern Honshu, up in the Tohoku-ken.
Oh wow!
And so it was really rural. What the good thing about that was we loved taking our Japanese classes, and they loved taking us. Like we went out to dinner with them, and we just did we went karaoke, and of course with them and things like that.
Me too.
You go karaoke with everybody, but it was great because we really did have to learn some Japanese because we were in fishing villages. And sometimes you couldn't even find a restaurant. This is how small these little towns were. So, and then the second time we lived in Japan for 2 years was actually right before we came back in 2020. And we were in, on the Kanto Plain. So, of course, there was tons to do. We were in Yokosuka.
Ah, wonderful.
We lived in Kamakura.
And we lived in Kamakura, which is just, we couldn't ask for a more beautiful place to live.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah. Well, I was living my second year, I moved to a little village outside of Nara. And so we were the only, I thought at the time we were the only foreigners there. I never saw another foreigner. But years later, when I blogged about it, like only, much more recently, I did discover an American who lived there at the same time because he was like searching for the name of our little village, Amagatsuji. And he was like, oh my God, I lived there at the same time. How come we never met? So
that's crazy.
But it was crazy. But I did, I learned Japanese through this fabulous system they had where there was a lot of basically housewives who weren't working. They'd all been trained, really thoroughly trained to teach. Same thing, to teach Japanese as a foreign language. And oh my goodness, I would go every Thursday morning and it was, one-on-one tuition and for the cost of basically a little bit for room hire and fabulous green tea and sweets. And it was like the highlight of my week. And when I left, I was so conversational. I've forgotten a lot now, but
a cultural connection that was just unbeatable because they would bend over backwards to try to like explain things for us or introduce us to different things that weren't really part of learning Japanese, but just a great opportunity.
Yeah,
we couldn't find that in the Kamakura area though. It was I think too industrial or too institutional, I guess.
Oh, I wonder. Oh, what a shame. Yeah. I miss Japan.
But at least I already had
fond memories.
I wasn't too worried about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you were in Slovakia for...
So I spent just a year in Slovakia. It was great. It was 2003, 2004. So it was before they joined the EU. But it was a really interesting time to be there. Lots of changes still happening. So I lived in Bratislava and taught business English. So I was mostly teaching in, kind of Western companies who had, relatively recently started up there. And so all my students were people who had kind of been thrust into these new roles. Like I had people who'd been engineers under socialism and now are marketing managers because no one had studied marketing. So no one knew anything about marketing. So they just had to take whoever wanted to do the job kind of thing. And so it was, and they were just all very, very welcoming and I loved it there. And the only reason really that we didn't stay longer there was because obviously the pay was pretty low at the time there and it was actually really hard to travel much further than, we would go to Vienna for the weekends and, because it's like 40 Ks away or something. Yeah. But, and also managed to get a job in Germany. And because, of course, I'd studied German all through high school and university. So to work in Germany was what I'd really, and it's hard to do. So, yeah.
Well,
as an Australian.
Lived in Germany. Yeah, we lived in Germany for I think a total of like 19 years, right?
Oh, wow.
Quite some time, yeah.
A long time.
Off and on.
Fabulous.
Yeah, on and off. Both our daughters, in fact, were born in Germany.
Oh, wow.
Back in the
Both
80s.
born in Germany and both graduated high school in Japan.
In Japan.
Oh, have fun. Oh, my goodness. What an awesome family.
Yeah. Where did you live?
So I lived in Heilbronn, so just north of Stuttgart in Baden-Württemberg. So, yeah. So at the time it was hard as Australians to get a job because they just would usually take people with EU passports. So they had to kind of advertise in the town to prove that there was no one else there who could do the job before they could hire us. It was a big rigmarole. It was a funny little kind of industrial town. It's near near the Audi factory and lots of automotive industry stuff. So, but it was a great place to live and, really central. And I got to improve my German a lot, which was very important. I got there and and they speak like the Swabian dialect there. And the apartment I got we were the youngest people by about 50 years. It was just happened to be like a group of, all the other apartments were retired elderly people. And so they had very thick dialect. And so the first couple of weeks I was like, I thought I knew German quite well, and now suddenly I don't know, I don't understand what any of these people are saying. It was crazy, but over time that did improve, thank goodness. So yeah.
And you had all those omas and opas.
Well, actually, I have to say they weren't very friendly, those omas and opas. They used to leave. No, not in that particular. They're a very conservative little town.
Wow.
They used to leave anonymous letters in my letterbox whenever I did something wrong. And I'm actually a real rule follower, but like if you don't know all the rules, then you can't follow them. And I would do things like early on I washed my car in the car park, which is what you would do here. And of course, I now know fully well that you can't do that because of the wastewater and the soap suds going into the drains, etc. So you have to go to the right place. But I didn't know. Nobody had, there's a lot of rules in Germany and nobody had told me. And their neighbours didn't come out and just, they knew I was Australian and they knew I'd just arrived, but they didn't come out and say, oh, actually, we need to go and do this at this place down the road. They wrote me anonymous letters and things like that. So it was,
that's funny.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting cultural introduction there, but a lot of other people were fabulous and it was all fun. So yeah, and I still loved living in Germany. It was great. And yeah, did lots of good traveling.
And how long were you there?
So. About 3.5 years. So yeah, my now ex-husband, I met him there, and so my son is half German. So and then we moved back to Australia. I was reluctant, but at the time he wanted to move there, move here for to get some better work, and all in all, I'm grateful now to be living in Western Australia over the last couple of years. But and I do love being near family and stuff as well. But I still really miss Europe.
So do we. Yeah. I mean, we live traveling anywhere, but we lived in Europe for so many years, and Japan. They're probably our two favorite places.
Oh, right.
Turkey.
Fabulous.
I love Turkey. Oh, so many places. We've lived all over. It's been great.
Well, speaking of the rules of the neighborhood, we lived in the Netherlands for a year and a half or 2 years. And
that's where we broke all the rules.
That's where we had our rule breaking. They had different rules for how you did your window curtains and blinds, and in the morning your window curtains had to be open halfway and your blind had to be up, and then midday your blinds could be down but your curtains had to be open, and then at night I'm sure I'm getting all of that wrong because we never really did figure it out.
The fact that there's even a rule for that is just hilarious.
And it was so important that the neighbor told the landlord, who then called my school principal to pull me in the office and explain the rules of curtains in the Netherlands. I am not kidding.
My goodness. You got told off by the boss.
Yeah. By the boss.
That is hilarious. I'm sure at the time it was not hilarious, but now it is. Oh, no. It would have been quite bewildering at the time, I'm sure.
It was. I mean, it was just so different. And we had lived in Germany, so we thought we were like, golden.
Yes, I would have thought you'd be fairly well prepared. Yeah.
We knew how to
never heard about the
recycle, we knew all
blinds
that
thing.
stuff.
So.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. The recycling can be tricky, but yeah, once you've got the hang of it, a lot of rules. I'm all for rules. I actually really like rules, and I'm a real rule follower. But it's just sometimes hard to learn all of them. So when you're new somewhere, but yeah.
Well, you're bound to make mistakes if you live life. So that's the way.
Well, yes, absolutely, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
In some ways, maybe that's part of the thoughtful travel is being out there and opening yourself to make those mistakes and to learn those things about where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think any kind of when things go wrong, whether you make mistakes or things go wrong or you get lost or any of those things, they're always the things that you end up telling the stories about. So they're obviously the things we reflect on more and we learn something from it or it's entertaining or whatever. So I think that being open to being wrong is a really important part of traveling. Otherwise, if we want to be definitely right and doing things correctly all the time, we really need to just stay home. So, and that's boring.
Right.
So
that's right.
And that's boring.
Well, and like you said, it turns into where you're just checking things off of a list because, I need to go see this. I need to go see this. I need to eat that. I need to do that. But if you never make the mistakes and meet the people and get a chance to be invited to somebody's house for tea, then it's just never going to happen.
Yep, for sure.
So what are some other ideas, I guess, that you can share for finding those thoughtful things that can really immerse you? We always look at like UNESCO intangible cultural heritages. Those are a really great place to start in a country.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Although they're difficult to find and do.
They can be, yeah.
It's true sometimes, yeah. But that's an awesome list. There's some such fascinating things on there. So that's a great idea. And the other thing I just tend to do is like deep dive into books or blogs or media, YouTube or whatever, from people who have lived there or who live there now. Or certain travelers where that they're kind of traveling in the way that you think is, the way you want to travel. So I never go looking or researching with the idea of I want to find all the really cool things here. I just kind of take a really meandering path, and then whenever something catches my eye, that's where I'll go deeper. So to go back to the case of Denmark, I was fascinated by the education system there because I'd watched a Netflix drama where they showed how the main character was a school teacher and that they taught the same kids for like 8 years or something. Like the teacher went up and things like that. And, compared to here, it's like so different. And, the kids were calling their teacher by their first name and all these. And, I've got a kid and I'm interested in education. And so all of that, was really fascinating to me. And so that's where I then started, researching more. And then when I was looking for accommodation, we found an Airbnb where the host was a teacher. And so I was like, oh, that's fabulous. Because, it was like where, we were staying in the home with them. And so I got to, she was she was so lovely because I did feel like sometimes, my son told me, you can't ask so many questions. He would be like, and I was like, oh, maybe I've gone too far and I've been kind of, in interrogation mode. But afterwards, on Airbnb, they give a review. And so she said, and Amanda was something like, so lovely and so interested in my work. It was great to talk to her. I was like, oh, phew, she didn't feel interrogated. But
that's hilarious.
It was great. My son did start the eye rolling thing when we bump into her as we're leaving, and he was like, oh no, here we go again.
Cut it short.
He's like, I'm ready to go out and see something, but or do something, but yeah.
Airbnbs can really go both ways with that, where you get a host who you never are going to see, and that's the way they want it, and then you get those that are like, hey, come on in, sit down. I've got some prosciutto and let's have some prosciutto and do some shots. And you just never, you never really know what to expect unless you
no, although if you find in the reviews, sometimes you can see, what they're like, but you never know for sure. So that host used to bring us freshly baked bread rolls every day, which was amazing.
That's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. So, so to answer your question, just like I just tend to deep dive. You know, the internet is an amazing place. I just tend to follow my nose and, you know, start deep diving into some topic that intrigues me. And then from there, you'll find all kinds of, you know, recommendations or places. Or, I mean, I'm lucky because I run a podcast. I get to talk to people all the time. And in fact, even part of the reason I went to Denmark in the first place was I'd interviewed an American who was living in Copenhagen, and she told me all these amazing things and about a particular art gallery, which sounded just so intriguing. And so things like that, I'd already, you know, that was even part of the reason to go in the first place. I'd started to learn more about it. So yeah, I think just that kind of, research immersion, but not with a goal to find all the things, but just to follow your nose and see what's there. I think that's, you know, one of the important parts of being a thoughtful traveler is a lot of people have this mindset when they travel is, I might never come here again. I have to do all the things. And that's just like such an unsatisfying way to travel because, first of all, some of the things you're not even going to like, and you could probably tell that in advance. And it means you're probably doing everything pretty quickly. And, you know, tick, tick, tick. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't give you the opportunity to just meander and go, you know, or find things that are particularly intriguing or interesting for you and, you know, take it slowly. And I mean, one of the things I love when we travel is to get a regular place, like a regular coffee shop or a regular bakery. And you get to, you know, even if you're only there for a week, but like when we were in Copenhagen, we were there in Copenhagen itself, 8 or 9 days or something. I can't remember. But there was a local little, like supermarket-y place where they had the best, like, you know, baked goods and we would go there every day for our like evening snack. We would go and pick it up and, you know, we got to chat to people and just the fact that you can walk into a very foreign supermarket and feel very familiar with it already because you've been there a few times before. All of that is just, I don't know, I just really love the feeling that you get by, you know, finding some regular places. So I know I had a guest on my podcast once who said that the definition of slow travel is when the guy at the coffee shop knows your order when you walk in. So you have to go there enough times that they figure out they know what you're going to order. And I thought that was a great way to define slow travel and also therefore thoughtful travel, I think.
Yeah.
We've done several of those type of cultural exchanges like that. And one of them was to Lithuania, where we stayed with a sister school. And several of the teachers from our school went to their school. Cool. And we did some mini lessons with their kids and we spent, I think, 2 weeks with them. And that was a great opportunity. 1 week, you're right.
That's awesome though. Yeah.
It was amazing.
It's a fast track to inside life, isn't it, when you do something like that?
That's right. And then they came to our school too, and we hosted them. Those type of exchanges, I can't say enough about them. I've done plenty. I've hosted plenty. We grew up in the Girl Scouts, so I've hosted Japanese Girl Scouts to the Aleutian Islands and British Girl Scouts to the Aleutian Islands, and we've just done all kinds of things, and I think that's how you really learn things that you wouldn't otherwise learn. Whether it's a song or something that you eat or a game or I mean, there's just so much. Like one time we were in Africa and we were staying at the campgrounds that you go around. You know, we're not luxury travelers, so we're always meeting,
me neither.
You know, local people. And this one girl was just sitting with us at the campfires. We're watching the sunset, and I was asking her. Here's the interrogator bit, right? Asking her about questions when she was growing up, and she goes, "Well, we weren't allowed to go outside at night, and especially if the yard wasn't swept." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Oh, yes. The most important thing to do in any African yard is to sweep it all the time because that's where they get rid of the snakes and the bugs."
Oh,
so they would just sweep. And it's, of course, I mean, it makes total sense.
Yes,
but I'm looking at her going, I'm looking at her going, you sweep. And I've got a picture of a yard because we're sitting in one and it's a dirt floor. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking, you sweep this all the time? And it just makes sense. But she was telling us about that. And it's just kind of one of those aha moments where, like, well, of course you did.
Well, and then we'd be driving through villages and we'd see people sweeping their yards.
And then you know why. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It was such an important part of growing up. I just thought that was just things like that To me, that's what travel should be about, learning those things.
Same.
I mean, who cares what year the Eiffel Tower was built? I mean,
you can look it up if you really want to know.
Exactly. That's the thing. All of those things are factual things you can look up whenever you want. But the less those more emotive kind of, curious things that are every day to someone else but not every day to us, all of that. It's much harder to learn about that. And it's so interesting. And I love those, all of those the simple everyday cultural differences that nobody even realizes that it's a unique thing until they've got a foreigner there to talk to about it. And you might say, why do you sweep the yard all the time? And that's absolutely my favorite part of travel, finding out those, kind of quirky and interesting differences. Because I think the other part of travel is it proves to us that we're all very, very much the same. And
very much the same. Although I have learned that the less you have in many countries in the world, you're still just as happy as I am with too much stuff.
Because,
I mean, we traveling in places like India where, I mean, they live in this little hut and all they have is this little box of their own belongings that's, 4 inches by 6 inches long. And what do? They open that box and they find something for you and give it to you out of their meager belongings. I mean, to me, it just really, I don't know. That's just one of those things. And I'm not just saying India. There are plenty of places we've been where we've sat on that dirt floor and had tea, as Jim was mentioning earlier, with the family and realizing that, gosh, we're spoiled.
We absolutely
are. But at the same time, like you said, we're all the same at heart too. We all want to share what we have and help other people understand where we're coming from. Everybody wants to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I think there's a lot made of how different everyone is, different ethnicities, different religion, all of this stuff. But when you get down to just having a chat with people, we are, at heart, very, very much the same. So, yeah. When I lived in Bratislava, I had a very close friend, or made a close friend, who was like born just a week after me. So we're very, almost exactly the same age. But of course, she'd grown up under socialism and I had not. And we were so very similar in so many ways. Like we went swimming together. We loved to swim for exercise. We were both chocoholics and we'd go to the chocolate cafe and things like that. And I would often forget that there was, any particular difference in how we'd grown up. But I never forget when I moved away, we were both very, very sad. When I moved away, that was almost the only reason I'd say we were very close friends and it was heart-wrenching to leave her. But I knew that I would see her again. That was a given for me that would happen.
Right.
We were moving to Germany and then, we were still going to be in Europe at some stage. It would happen, etc. But of course, her mindset growing up was that you can't, you don't have that freedom of travel. And I didn't appreciate that at the time. And then it wasn't even very long, maybe 5 or 6 months later, that my company in Germany sent me to a conference in Vienna. And so I said to my friend in Bratislava, hey, I'm going to be in Vienna that weekend. Let's find a way to meet up. And so she had a friend in Vienna. So she came over and stayed with the friend and we went out for dinner and got to catch up. And she said to me then, when you left, I thought I would never see you again. And she really believed that because of, her differences in how she'd grown up. Mm-hmm. And it was just heartbreaking to think that she'd felt that way. Whereas for me, it was, yes, I wish I was still going to be living opposite you, but, I'll see you again. And of course, we've caught up, I don't know, half a dozen times since in various places. She came to visit me in Germany eventually, and I'd been back and she was in the Czech Republic. We caught up and, we're still in touch. But, she really thought she would never see me again. And that, that was kind of that, it just felt really heartbreaking. And so it's funny, we're all the same and we have just these little differences that we don't even know sometimes. But, but I still love learning those parts about, about people around the world.
One thing that Jim and I have found that works really well is to try and take cooking lessons. And cooking lessons are thankfully becoming more and more popular around the world. Although I would put the caveat on there that the more private the lesson, the more, of course, time you're going to have alone with that person. But you get someone in a kitchen and you start cooking with them and you'll find out all kinds of information because you're stuck there together anyway. We were in Prague one time. I think this was our very first cooking lesson, maybe our second. And in Prague, in the Czech Republic, her family, her grandmother had been interned in a camp because she was Jewish. But when she got out, she didn't ever tell anybody she was Jewish again. Her family didn't even know she was Jewish till they had just found out that year her grandmother was dying. And on her deathbed, basically, she said, this is a whole part of your history that you didn't know about.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, how poignant is that?
My goodness, to keep that secret for so long, and for you to hear about it in a cooking lesson, like to have that nice,
in her apartment, and it was just, I mean, things come out when you're sharing food and just hanging out that would normally happen, and so we found that to be a really good way when we travel around the world to try and seek those. It's a way that when you're only there for a couple of weeks, maybe you can get that piece of, part that you're just not going to get unless you have slow travel. I mean, we're lucky that we've traveled and lived in countries, so we have plenty of those experiences, but I crave them. So I'm always looking for it.
Oh, no. And I agree. I think it's a way to kind of fast forward a relationship because, you are sort of stuck together for a few hours in a kitchen and, similar if you have like a private walking tour or something like that. There's lots of different experiences these days where you can, if you do a bit of research first and figure out what's going on. It's not just some, big, really touristy outfit or something, but there's lots of ways where you can get those kind of, I don't know, it sounds awful to say captive situations and, with people who are really keen to talk to you. And So I agree. I've had a few of those kind of experiences myself. And it's a great way to get to know something unique and interesting about the local culture or just about a local person, which is fascinating in itself.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I knew we would just have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I could go all day.
We obviously could too. Well, is there anything you want our audience to know about you or where to find you or anything like that we can help you out on? Or
that'd be great. So anyone who wants to hop over for another something to listen to, just come look up the Thoughtful Travel podcast, and the show notes and all of the other stuff in my old blog posts and other stuff all of that is at notaballerina.com.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Streets and Eats. If you liked what you heard, please show us some love, hit the like button, and leave us a review. Maybe even subscribe so you don't miss any future podcasts. Also, we'd love it if you joined us on our Facebook private group, Streets and Eats, where we just have an ongoing conversation about all things travel. Ciao for now.